I hope you're feeling that cosmic love in you, because that's definitely something that we want to promote in here. I love that love-based spirituality is the one that causes us to move in ways that are beneficial and make communities flourish. So thank you, Dr. King, for that address. And for this next part of the conversation, we wanted to bring leaders here in Los Angeles together that are thinking not just of how spirituality impacts the individual, but how communities of faith are making, are joining the struggle for justice and are changing the health of communities. This conversation will be moderated by Sojourner's Vice President and Chief Impact and Strategy Officer, Dr. Jessica Felix Romero. So help me welcome Dr. Felix Romero. All right, let's see. Very good. All right. Good morning. It's my joy to welcome Reverend Dr. Alexia Salvatierra to the table and Reverend Michael Mata to our conversation. Please sit down. Your mic is to the right. All right, I'm going to introduce our wonderful guest today. Reverend Dr. Alexia Salvatierra is a pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church, academic dean of Central Latino, and associate professor of Mission and Global Transformation at Fuller Seminary. She's the co-author of 3 books, Faith-Rooted Organizing, Mobilizing the Church in Service to the World, Buried Seeds, Learning from the Vibrant Resiliency of Marginalized Christian Communities, and God's Resistance, Mobilizing the Church to Defend Immigrants. She has over 40 years' experience in congregational community development, organizing, and advocacy. Welcome, Dr.
Thank you. Oh, it's working good.
Yeah, there we go. And then we have Reverend Michael Mata, also just a joy to have him here. He's designed and administered community faith-based programs for over 30 years, including community development, congregational redevelopment, intercultural programs, leadership development, and community youth development. I'm sure he's going to share some wonderful stories from that today. He directs the graduate program in transformational urban leadership at the Azusa Pacific Seminary and holds degrees in biblical literature, religion, and urban planning. Love that. He really has heart for LA, and I say he's an amazing crafter of coalitions. So welcome, Michael. So today, this is a symposium about health and spirituality. So what interested you about this topic today? Why did you say yes to come? You want to start with you, Alexia?
Well, why I said yes to come is because my friends asked me. That's cultural.
Yes, community love.
But when I think about the intersection between spirituality and health, I think about the Spanish translation of the word shalom, that many of you may know that word, that it means peace, but it means peace with justice. It goes deeper than that. It's a biblical term. And in Spanish, we usually translate it as bienestar, which is literally well-being. And I think of Jeremiah 29:7, where the people of Israel are in exile in a country that they're surrounded by enemies, and they're called to work for the bienestar of their community, because the bienestar of their bienestar, their well-being, depends on the well-being of their communities. And of course, culturally, for me, we know that if our family is not well, that we are not well. That's a cultural truth in my community, cultural awareness in our community. And of course, if we have one heavenly parent, we're all one family. So that's, to me, you can't separate questions of spirituality and health.
Beautiful. Michael?
Well, thank you, Dr. King, for an excellent presentation. I wonder where you were 40 years ago when that would have been helpful for me as I stumbled upon this understanding of health impacts the quality of life of individuals. And for me, it was working with youth here in Los Angeles, where young people came to me and said, "Why are you here? We're going to be dead in 5 years." That kind of threw a wrench into my understanding of youth work out of a church, where you kind of create activities, you do Bible studies, you do those kinds of work in order to get young people to come to a decision in their own lives as the evangelical. But the understanding was, as I got into the work and the lives of these individuals, that this aspect of the divine wanted something more than just a personal decision, a spiritual decision, a faith decision, but it was something more that transcended their own personal experience, but that also impacted in where they lived and how they lived. That was very significant. But it wasn't as if I kind of knew that already. I wish seminary would have given me some of those tools, but it was something that I felt was also helpful in that it was more inductive. It was coming alongside the community and understanding that this aspect of spirituality or faith was something more holistic than something of a personal nature.
Powerful. That sort of sets us up for the next sort of question, which was sort of, what were some moments where you started to realize health and spirituality were starting to become central to your work? And I'm going to invite each of you kind of share some stories of that. I'll start with you, Reverend Alexia.
Great. I have 2 stories, and I need to say that I chose CLUE stories. So some of you are familiar with CLUE, and some of you aren't. CLUE is Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice, and I was the executive director for about a decade. And it was really, did all of its work during that time, so 2000 basically to 2010, 2011, did all of its work in coalition with LANE, which is a community organization working on economic justice, and various labor unions, including ATRE, which is the union for the hotel workers here, so definitely. So I have 2 little stories from that decade that I wanted to share that I think really talk about this intersection between spirituality and health at multiple levels. So during that time, the luxury hotels around LAX, around the airport, were in competition with each other. And so they were trying to make more and more luxurious rooms. So the hotel housekeepers, who were mostly immigrant women, ended up having to fulfill a checklist of 100 items in a half hour. And so what happened was their backs began to fall apart, that they couldn't pick up their children without pain, they couldn't hold their children without pain, and many of these hotels were not unionized and did not offer any kind of health care, and this is pre-Obamacare. So there was a huge campaign by the coalition to try to pass legislation that would limit the acceleration of production, that would pay attention to these health needs that these women had. And of course, when you have a coalition and the faith community is one part of it, we really can contribute our unique gifts because we don't have to do it all. So we were doing these big demonstrations to call public attention to the problem and to support the legislation. And so what we would do, we'd have this big demonstration in front of these hotels, and we would do healing prayer over these women. And that actually had a direct effect on a number of these women, that they were people of faith, and the healing prayer was consoling and supportive, and people actually experienced healing. But it also forced the managers to see these women not just as workers, but as human beings who had broken backs. So we watched the faces of the managers and the owners be impacted, but also the general public and the city council were impacted, and we did win. And we think it had everything to do with that role. So that's one story. I'll let Micah tell a story, and then I'll tell my other story.
You want to go with your next story, or you want to?
Oh, I could go right into this.
Go to the next
Sure.
one. Go
Why
for it.
not?
Keep
I'll do them
going.
both at once. The other one, a lot of, we were talking about Los Angeles stories, and people inside Los Angeles don't think of the Inland Empire as Los Angeles. But if you're outside of Los Angeles, it's part of the larger Los Angeles region. Many people don't know that the Inland Empire has the largest concentration of warehouses in the world. And at the time we're talking about, most of the workers in these warehouses were temp workers. The temporary agencies were located in the warehouses. So I want you to imagine that. And most of the workers are immigrant workers, ex-prisoners, people without a high school education. And the working conditions were nothing short of atrocious. So in the Inland Empire in the summer, it gets to be 115 degrees, no air conditioners and no fans. So OSHA violations. But the workers are too scared to report them because they know that if they come the next day to the temp agency and they have reported something, that they may not have a job. So we were asked as CLUE to see if we could do anything about the situation. So we hired Moises Escalante, who when he was young, he was part of the base Christian community in El Salvador under Archbishop Romero and the Jesuits, and he brought all the tools from that experience. And so what we did is we formed initially a training program for these warehouse workers that came right out of the base Christian community movement that was about strengthening their faith so that they could be fearless, so that they could put their love above their fear. It was supposed to be an 8-week training program. After the 8 weeks, the workers said, oh, no, we're not stopping. They actually became a base Christian community. They went on meeting for years. But beyond that, they were fearless spies, that they learned all about OSHA violations. They talked to other workers. They encouraged other workers. They ended up putting together a report that then triggered an investigation that held that whole industry accountable. And I met some of those workers at a gathering a few years later, and I knew who they were before I met them because of the way that they carried themselves, because of their sense of self-worth that came from the messages about who they are, their identity, coming from their faith and not from their environment. So those are 2 stories of, I don't know, hundreds of stories. I just decided that I would pick those 2. But just talking about the holistic nature of the intersection between spirituality and health.
So powerful. I would just, what's wonderful about that is that for me, I think as I was preparing these questions and thinking about this, we often think about church, religion, health, and spirituality, and we think about it only at the church context, in the building. It's something, direct services we've pulled somewhere. And so your stories are really touching because they tell us that actually the people who are out in the community are actually people of faith. It's not the institution or the building necessarily. It's the lived experience and expression in community.
That makes me think of one more little one-liner, which is just that Diane Donahue, I was just remembering her, most of you are not old enough to have known her. Sister Diane Donahue, but she ran a program called Esperanza at St. Vincent's, and part of what Esperanza did, they had promotoras de salud, who were immigrant women, again, who went into the homes of their neighbors and taught basic public health care education and did blood pressure checks and also talked to people about their rights as tenants. So just thinking about not in the church at all, out into the community.
And not in the doctor's office at all.
Not in the doctor's offices
exactly.
either.
Wonderful. Michael, share us.
Well, some of you might be familiar now with the social determinants of health, that now is a more expansive understanding of what health is all about. I came upon it, again, I stumbled into it working with young people in Los Angeles, not too far from here. Now the neighborhood is called Koreatown. Most of the young people were from MacArthur Park area as well. Very struggling, challenged environment for young people. To the point is, when I met these young men and women, they said, "You're wasting your time. I'm going to be dead in 5 years." Now that threw me off again. I go, how do you really begin to help them understand there's something more to life than what they saw in experiences in their daily life, in school life, et cetera, or to even have mentors or models of which something could be different in their lives. But thankfully, through the space that was created by that congregation to bring community youth together, we began that journey of exploring what God is, who God is. And it wasn't like they came in ignorant. When I asked them to draw a picture of God, it was very interesting. I would usually say, what do you think they drew? Well, the picture they drew was a white old man that had a faint resemblance to Santa Claus. So their understanding of God was you're either good or bad, right? Naughty or nice. And so there was a very judgmental perspective on that. They already had judgment tossed upon them by virtue of their ethnicity and their backgrounds. So their identity was already pretty much defined by society. And so it was a really an eye-opener. How do we go about that? And certainly, being as a preacher's kid, church-going, the Bible's the answer, so to speak. And so how did you get young people who had no interest or understanding of this aspect of religion or faith to engage that? And I can tell you the story quickly. I told them, well, there's an R-rated book here that you need an adult to read with. And so the last thing you want to say to a teenager, you can't do that, right? So we got that interesting to do that. And unfortunately, over the time and effort of exploring who they were, who God is, the love we had for them. I mean, I woke up one morning and said, I'm not just loving them because it's a job. I love them totally because of who God is and what God has made them to be and who I am in terms of my faith. And I think that translated, or they saw that in terms of the work we did. And finally, one day, after a few years of engagement and giving them opportunity to explore different aspects of life, moving beyond and understanding, again, the social determinants of health, even though that language wasn't current then, but taking them out, they finally came to me one day and they challenged me. And they said, if you're God, you're talking about God, and God is real to us now. But isn't God also interested in my daily life, in my economic well-being? And of course, this wasn't their language. Because they said to me, and there was 3 guys, Spider, Dula, and Jairo. And they said to me, we know how to get money. We know how to do that. But we're tired of looking over our shoulders. You've given us another understanding of our lives and purpose and identity. Again, this language wasn't what they were saying, but it demonstrates, embodies many of the things that we just heard from Dr. King, that we want to get jobs. We're willing to do that, but no one is hiring us. We walk in, they see us, they take our application, they toss it. As they said, they file it. So you better help us, or we got to do what we got to do. Wow. There I was in my office with all my theological books, my biblical literature books, the good book on my desk. And I was being challenged by these young men and women, because they were representing the whole group they came into. We're representing the whole group that we have here. Is God really real? Is God interested in our economic well-being? And so, fortunately, by that time, we had developed the collaborative networks that we needed to forge. Again, the context was very important, to mobilize the larger community, to see young people as potential employees now, right? Not a problem, because I was getting calls, hey, Michael, can you get these guys off? They're scaring away our customers. They're hanging out in the corner. They were seen as a problem. But now the young people were seeing themselves as wanting to be contributors to society, to be seen as valued, because they got it. I mean, I was under the desk going, yes, yes, yes. But they challenged me, is God not interested in my economic well-being as well? So fortunately, we began to engage the various sectors and develop a program that we were able to demonstrate that young people were viable employees, to give it a chance. And fortunately, it wasn't about building another social program. It was really helping the society, the context, the community to see young people as integral parts. That these young people are now, can I say, I don't like the word empowered, but they found the agency, the efficacy of the love of God in their lives, that they felt like they needed to do something different that would support them and their family. Fortunately, that little program went out of business in 4 years because we achieved our goal, which for our neighborhood, to see young people as viable employees. So if you go today to any business, major legitimate business in Koreatown, we have young people living there, working there, being part of that community.
Yes, we love that. We love those stories. We love the work. Thank you for all that you were doing. Sort of great transition to sort of our next question, and this resonates with what Dr. King was talking about, that we know that health can impact the way that we can show up spiritually. And I think also the flip is true, that spirituality can impact the way that we show up to our own health. So let's dig into a little more complicated terrain for a few minutes and talk about how theology can influence how people can imagine what's possible with health, right? So Michael, you just shared the imagination that those young men were experiencing. You helped ignite them. They could see something different. How do you see, from either your own experience or in working in community, how theology and health have had a dance, whether it's been helpful or unhelpful?
Well, certainly, again, I'm speaking from that context because it was so pivotal in my own development and understanding how faith is a driver, could be a driver for change, not on a personal level, but also on a community-wide level, which was very essential because I was trained to see a young person as a person, right? And yet they live they go to work, they go to school, they have family, they hang out in the community, as a lot of people do. And so there had to be other aspects that supported that aspect of who they were, that they were valued, they were important, they were significant, right? And then for themselves to see that they had some sense of ability, poder, we use in Spanish, right? Ability and power to engage a different narrative that was rather imposed upon them. And that the image or the theological perspective and understanding that I wanted to impart with them, and the work that I do with other, even currently, is you're created in the image of God. You are beautiful. You are worthy of something more than what society may tell you, more than a statistic may tell about your colleagues and your friends or your community. And I think that was a beginning for them to really understand that on a mental level, but also then ultimately to begin to experience it in a much more deeper, emotional level that then gave them the confidence that, yes, I'm going to risk going and getting a job and being rejected because there's something more than just me. I'm part of a larger community.
Powerful.
There's a larger community that believes in me, that will stand by me in terms of advocacy work, that will make sure that whatever the world says about me is a lie.
I was thinking about, Michael, when you were talking about the way these young people were seen, I was thinking about the invisibility of the Hispanic church.
Oh, yeah.
That, I go to conferences and people say, oh, the church is dying. And I'm like, our churches are not dying. They say all the young people are leaving. And I say, our young people are angry with the older people, but they love their grandparents. And they feel deeply connected to the same familia de Dios. And so I want to say something about these Hispanic churches that are invisible, which is that healing is bread and butter, that the Holy Spirit heals. And it's just a constant drumbeat. And that drumbeat isn't always understood because of some of the colonialism, isn't always understood as broadly as it needs to be. But I have students all the time at Centro Latino who get this broader vision of what healing means. And a lot of people get it. My pastor, Carlos Paiva, years ago used to talk about healing communities. It was just automatic for him that you talk about healing, then you immediately extend that to, well, then how do we heal the community? He says that when Jesus sent out the disciples, that he sent them out to preach and to heal. And that why would we limit that healing to individuals? It was the whole community that was healed. And then I think about my daughter, that in high school started getting into some things that she shouldn't have and that were self-destructive. And then she was in a class that was raising her consciousness around history and depression. And she said, Mom, I've stopped drinking and using drugs because they're trying to kill us and I'm not going to let them because God loves us. Yes. I was like, yes, that understanding, the message that comes from healing being a theme in our communities, that was able to help her walk away from drugs and alcohol at a key point in her life. The last thing I would say is that, in trauma, I've been getting more and more involved over the last few years with questions around trauma and faith. I co-teach with Dr. Cynthia Erickson, who is an internationally known trauma specialist on trauma and faith. And they usually say that when you're treating trauma, that the first step has to be security and safety. And I was listening to that and I was thinking, oh no, but that's not possible in a lot of our communities. That isn't possible. So what's the first step? And what struck me was that collective agency actually heals. That's what I've seen in our Hispanic churches, that collective agency heals trauma. So it's this combination of faith and community and the way that the Holy Spirit, I believe, works through all of that as a movement that is actually a transnational movement, that Hispanic, doesn't matter what denomination you are in Latin America, that this understanding of a healing spirit moving with power through the church and into the world and through the world is really core to those renewal movements.
Powerful. Thank you. Well, so we've now had a little bit of the more philosophical sort of conversation. I'm going to re-ground us back to here in LA in this moment, this city right now, and the people who live here and call it home. We've talked around, you've already said about how you've seen the health of LA transform during your time here. You both have such a deep history with Los Angeles and California, and could you give us a glimpse into sort of some big shifts that you've noticed? You've highlighted some of those, or any particular turning points in your sort of own personal story with the city where you think that you saw either an opportunity or a big challenge around health?
Yes. The social earthquake of 1992, also known as the LA riots or upheaval or the rebellion, that was another pivotal point in my own personal and professional development. Because even though the focus was in South LA, the second flashpoint was what we now know as Koreatown. And I saw the buildings burned. I actually dug bullets. But it was the coming together of the faith communities that really began to really show me the power or demonstrate the power of faith in the midst of all that we saw around us, which was very destructive, demoralizing, almost saying, I'm just going to give up and leave because look what it's transpired. But because of the work that we began to do in an interfaith level, because all of us were coming there out of a conviction of our faith. I mean, that was very pivotal in a moment where I was gathering with some great mentors of mine, Rabbi Harvey Field, Mahir Matut from the Islamic Center, Rabbi Field from the Wilshire Temple. Those are already resting in peace. But though we were together with a common purpose of rebuilding our communities, forging the relationships that would help us reconnect and reestablish the relationships, or even strengthen the relationships that maybe weren't there, because I think the rebellion was reflected the breakdown in relationships, not just institutionally and politically and systemically, but within the communities itself, pitting one group against another. Again, the invisible group was the Latino community that was as impacted like any other were there, but mobilized us to come together to do something for the greater good that was beyond institutional building. Yeah. And it was faith that really kept us in that journey. And I can truthfully say that, what is it now, 30-some years later, some of those individuals, Salem Mariotti in particular, and others of different faith, I consider my colleagues and friends, because it is out of, again, the conviction that, hope is alive and we can keep that alive. And we need to work towards those kinds of things that would recognize the value and appreciation for everybody's contribution and presence in our communities.
So it's so fun, Michael, listening to you, and just so many memories, so many ghosts, right? Spirits, not ghosts, with the Lord. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. My family comes from Mexico City and from the Ukraine, in the generation of my grandparents. So when people ask me in Spanish what country I'm from, I say I'm from a Hispanic country named Los Angeles, which I know we're a very diverse country, but we're also a Hispanic country. But I lived here from when I was born in 1956 until 1982. And from 1980 to 1982, I was organizing all over LA. And at that point, LA was very, very segregated. We had also had a social earthquake in 1965 when I was 9 years old that I remembered. It was huge riots in 1965. It was so segregated that if I went into parts of South LA, that I was in danger even as a light-skinned Latina, because they were only Black, they were only Latino, they were only Asian. It was very segregated, and I ran away. I went to Northern California, I lived in Central California, and I came back in the year 2000, so I was in Oakland in 1992. I didn't miss it, it was just very different. And I came back to these incredible coalitions interfaith coalitions, interracial coalitions that really had begun after 1992, but by the time I got back in 2000, they were just on fire and doing amazing work. And I remember people from the foundations in New York coming to see us, which did not happen right before that. So I think that the Holy Spirit has been at work in Los Angeles for a long time, and I'm a step removed now because I'm really working with people internationally online. But we do have folks in Southern California, and I think God is continuing to work in Southern California.
Great segue in the last few minutes we have. Could you share with me, the rest of us, what's kind of the future of health and spirituality that you forecast or see for Los Angeles and for California, from who you're talking to? What excites you about the possibility? What do you see fruiting that maybe you haven't noticed?
I think the discussion is still valued and necessary. I've been part of research at Rand Corporation looking at the role of faith communities in addressing health disparities. Mm-hmm. And I sometimes some of the literature, and it's in peer-reviewed journals, some of the people who are policymakers aren't reading them because they're so unique, right? It's like writing a good theology book. The only ones that read it is your students and your fellow people in that profession. But I think that we need to make a clarion call that faith and spirituality are integral to the health and viabilities of some of our communities. We know as people of faith who are lived in marginal communities that somehow that keeps us alive and keeps us going, but it needs to change the context when we're doing that. And I think some resources are being developed. I was part of a collective impact work on sexually transmitted infections in South LA, where we developed a toolkit for youth ministers to be engaged at. So these interventions and toolkits are really important and significant in moving forward to building capacity and understanding, building capacity within our faith communities of what they can do beyond just having a worship on Sunday and other activities as well. So I think that's important. I think on the other side, the health communities, I'm on two health-related foundations, and where, again, the social determinants of health has broadened their perspective on where we need to invest in it. But the limitations of the social determinants of health, which is economics, social community, access to health, the limitations there is what Dr. King really lifted up, is relationships and community. That aspect, that social capital that we understand as people of faith is essential for us to thrive, is sometimes missing. So I think we have a role as people of faith, as chaplains and pastors and people of who have a deep spirituality to continue to advocate to the importance of this kind of dialogue, but not just talk about it, begin to embody it in terms of the policies and actions that we are part of and can actually contribute towards.
Wonderful, thank you.
So I want to say that I work quite a bit with emerging generations. The title that actually means most to me is not Reverend or Doctor, it's Madrina. And I wear around my neck that Vanessa gave me. It means Godmother, but not just sort of as a relationship, but more like the Godfather. Only we don't kill people, but fierce. But I want to say that I have a lot of hope that is connected to these emerging generations, because I feel, and we do a lot of convening at Fuller of the emerging generations. And what we're seeing is that these emerging generations have a very holistic view of the world, that they're interdisciplinary automatically, they're intersectional, they're multicultural, and they're transnational. That Los Angeles has always been a global region, but now there's a real consciousness that we are transnational all the time. We are not like the people in Latin America and the diaspora. No, we are all transnational people. So I just feel like young people, and there are many of you in this room, are not going to take these separations for an answer to the question. That you're going to look for what it looks like to work holistically.
That's right.
Powerful. Thank you so much to both of you. Really appreciate your time and your work.